I'm not in denial. I'm just selective about the reality I accept. Bill Watterson. The Daily Grind, Chapter 154. The contrast between the roadways of the Midwest and the alien landscape of route predation were just as stark the second time as on James's first excursion here. Twin suns hung overhead, having shifted only slightly from their previous positions, pulling apart from each other and drifting toward opposing horizons. If yesterday they'd been able to spend half a day here to only minutes outside, then the days and nights here in subjective time must last for years. A cycle stretched so far it would be more like seasons than days to anyone inside it. Of course, that was if time played by the rules. So far, they'd seen time play by a lot of rules, and none of them were consistent. Around them, the sands stretched as eternally as ever. James tried to spot the splotches of metal burrs that Els said were scattered out there, but the shimmering heat of the suns and the way the desert sands blended into each other made that next to impossible. Instead, he caught glimpses of the occasional scrub brush, the odd jutting rock formation, and sometimes small movements from the landscape. While the fauna of this place was aggressive and alien in a very harsh way, the vegetation was almost comical, because James recognized it. It was the same plant life he'd been watching out the windshield for a week of travel to get here. Yellow and purple flowered weeds and tangled low branches, grass with a level of determined resilience that mocked God. He'd taken the time to check when they had a chance earlier. It wasn't some kind of weird dungeon replica, it was just eternally defiant earth weeds, digging roots through alien asphalt and otherworldly sand, refusing to give up. James thought it was beautiful. The creatures of his world weren't so easily turned away by something as small as relentlessly hostile conditions. And yet the rest of it, everything else aside from those familiar plants, was so deep in the uncanny valley that the contrast to his recent road trip was forever in the front of his mind. There was no music playing, because they needed to be able to hear anything approaching, or whatever El called to them over the radio. James and Anesh were still making conversation, especially on the longer stretches of nothing, but it was a less relaxed way to pass the time, and more just nervous thoughts and observations. And when the world outside the window looked weird, it wasn't a sign that they'd taken a corner and opened up some new vista. It was a sign there was a potential threat coming up. James checked the odometer. They'd crossed the point where the gas station they'd encountered yesterday should have been, and nothing but flat terrain and a slight bend in the road awaited them. "Wasn't there something here?" he asked Anesh. "James, everything looks the same." Anesh had learned from his uncomfortable position yesterday, and had flattened the back seat and the passenger's chair down into the most open space possible. He was sitting with his back propped up against the rear wheel well, with a field of vision that encompassed a huge swath of the desert outside their windows. Was there something here? "Should have been a gas station," James said. "Did it move?" "Ask Elle." "I don't want to talk to Elle. Not right now. She's Elle." "How very tautological of you." Anesh smiled. Sorry. James wrung his hands on the wheel. "I'm stressed out. The farther in we get, the more I start to think that we should be back home solving real problems instead of... shit, we basically are on vacation." "Yes, James, that's what a vacation is," Anesh said. "The part where we trust the 100 other competent people who are with us to handle the crises and get to do what we want for a bit." James snorted. "Fine. What if I don't want to talk to Elle?" "Then you have to assume that sometimes buildings go away," Anesh told him. James pursed his lips and thought for a second. "Nah," he settled on, and poked the radio where it was clipped to the dashboard. "Hey, Elle, why do the buildings here sometimes just go away? Over," he asked. The radio crackled to life as Elle's response came through. "Oh yeah, stuff rearranges. Maps don't quite work the same way here. Sorry, should have told you." "What in the fuck does..." James scowled at the radio before hitting the talk button again, ignoring Anesh trying to smother a laugh behind him. "Elle, how the hell do you find your way around, then?" Over. There's patterns, dumbass. Elle sounded like she was exasperated right back at him, even through the radio's imperfect sound quality. You take certain turns, you get to denser locations, that sort of thing. If there's no building here, that means we look for a building at the fork of the next split. If there's nothing there, we can go right and get to a hotel, or left and go somewhere random. There was a quiet stretch. She didn't say over, Anesh noted. No, she didn't. How long do you think it would take to learn this stuff? James asked. Not too long. I could do it in a couple of runs, Anesh said, failing to point out that his pattern recognition skills were actually capital S skills, and he was sort of cheating. But I see. She's been here a lot. I wonder how she survived this long. It feels like a lot of the guard life here is very... James filled in what Anesh was searching for. All or nothing? He asked. Yeah, that. The office isn't too far off from that, though, James mused. Is it really, though? Anesh started to question. James shook his head. Okay, I thought about it for a second. He gave a nervous laugh, double-checking his wing mirrors. But seriously, the first thing most people are going to see coming into Officium Mundi is a pissed-off stapler. I did, after all. And that's a problem, but it's an eminently survivable problem. Here? What would have happened if one of those speed bumps caught your foot? Oh, I'd be dead, repeatedly, Anesh confirmed tartly. Because they're unkillable flesh grinders. Well, hang on, let's reserve some judgment on unkillable for now. Sure, but I do get your point. I guess I'm just thinking about things like Camerondas, the great filter of if you brought a friend along. James perked up. Oh, tangent really quick. So, you know how Deb and Frequency are dating? Everyone knows that. Anesh's voice was dry as he shook his head. Everyone thinks it's adorable. I find that very uncomfortable, but yes, they are dating. Okay, first point, it is adorable, James countered. But that's not like some kind of xenophilia thing. I don't know if you've noticed, but people in the Order are just generally kind of happy whenever anyone starts dating. We made an atmosphere that's open enough that people don't feel weird about it, and I kind of like that. People think we're cute, and that's a hell of a shock to my low self-esteem ass. But no, what I was going to say was... Car? Anesh's voice cut him off halfway through his point. And all of a sudden, James was snapped back to the present. He'd almost lost himself in that road trip vibe of thin time and casual chatter, and forgotten the second sun and the supernaturally aggressive other drivers on the road. The incoming vehicle was a bulbous little sedan, cutting toward them at what looked like 30-degree angle with the road, coming in from their left. James tossed the radio back to Anesh, who started signaling to Elle, while he focused on keeping the wheel under control as he pushed the car to accelerate. There was nothing nearby. Not even a fork or curve in the road. The closest thing to terrain was the vertical rock outcrop to their right that was already receding into the rear view as soon as James thought about it, and a few patches of determined dry grass on the sides of the road. James couldn't even see a possible destination ahead of them, except more asphalt. Nowhere to hide. Elle's freaking out, Anesh said calmly. He'd moved to a kneeling position in the middle of the car, wobbling slightly with the occasional speed changes. Here you go. He passed James a pair of earplugs. Nowhere to hide, he repeated James's own thought. All right. James shakily took a hand off the wheel to put the ear protection in. He was going 110. Elle was pulling ahead of them even faster than that, and still the incoming car was on a vector to intercept. Ready? He asked, voice loud to hear himself through the earplugs. Anesh checked the magazine on his P90. Ready, he confirmed. James hit the buttons on his side console to roll the windows down, clearing out a little of Anesh's line of fire and letting in scorching dry air. The cool interior of the car turned to a furnace in a heartbeat, the wind whipping past, wobbling the windows and their frames. Then he put his hands back on the wheel, trusted to his partner to cover him, and pushed the gas pedal down as far as it could possibly go. He could see the incoming vehicle in the wing mirror now, and it was all of a sudden apparent that this thing wasn't any human-made car at all. There were strange seams down its outside that flexed organically in the whipping 100-mile-an-hour winds as it closed in. The headlights twitched back and forth, strangely living metal eyes tracking prey, tracking them, and its front hood was studded with small rough bumps, nodules that had clearly grown in a pattern, but were grown nonetheless. No one had built this car. James didn't have time to think much about that, though. He had one goal right now: maximize contact time. In his mind, he ran through the factors at play. Elle was ahead of them, and didn't have a way to help anyway. She was out of it. The car coming at them would be coming in at an angle, and at these speeds, James was confident he couldn't outrun it. So, he needed to give Anesh the most time possible to shoot it before it hit them, because if it hit them, they were dead. But he also couldn't slow down, because then it would just hit them when they had fewer defenses. James urged as much speed out of the car as he possibly could. 120, 130, the tires wobbling underneath, every scrap slowing just how quickly their enemy was closing on them, but only slowing it. He moved them into the farthest possible lane, wheels a half-inch away from the metal death trap that was the highway's shoulder. At these speeds, only the barest flick of the wheel for less than a half-second would get him there. His driving skill ranks pulled their weight, helping him to correct without panic or failure. And, as a last resort, just in case it would matter, James tuned his shield bracer to vehicle impact. It might be too vague, but it might be enough. He didn't have time to actually read it, see if it worked. "Contact!" Anesh shouted from the back seat, and the inside of the car got a lot louder very quickly. Anesh fired out of the backseat window in small bursts at first, just making sure he was actually connecting with the incoming vehicle. The noise, cracking discharge of the ammunition and the high coppery ting as the gun cycled, overwhelmed everything else. The engine, the tires on the road, the thoughts in James' head. Earplugs would keep him from bleeding out of his ears, but he didn't make the situation quiet. And then, in the 3 seconds they had before the oncoming creature rammed into them, Anesh jammed the gun as hard as he could into the crook of his shoulder, pulled the trigger, and held it down. Impact sites dotted the car-shaped thing that was charging them, tiny craters beginning to pepper its outside. The windshield and a couple of its side windows cracked, spiderwebbed, and then shattered into jagged shards. Anesh tried to keep the full auto stream of bullets focused on the hood of their attacker, aiming to shred whatever it had that passed for an engine, which probably functioned as its heart. He'd considered going for the tires, but he would have had to have shifted forward too far to avoid shooting their own interior. Also, the thing had just plowed over the strip of spined metal on the side of the road like it was nothing, so that probably wouldn't be very effective. It was almost on them when James grabbed out at the world with his absorbed blue and yanked a waist-high wall of road up, inches in front of their enemy. He did it relying on instinct to time it right, and he only got maybe 30 feet of distance. Something grabbed the road, ripped it from its command a split second later, and slammed it back down. But it was still enough to fumble the vector of their attacker, and force it to jerk wildly back, wobbling across the highway as it steadied out parallel to them. He bought them 4 more seconds of contact time. Anesh didn't waste that time either. He lashed out with his own absorbed blue orb. Separate alloy, rending away chunks of the component parts of some of the metal pieces of the car creature, its armor shedding away and clattering to the pavement in the rapidly fading distance. A trigger of munitions dumped from his gun bangle as his magazine ran dry, the bracelet restocking him up to operational status as a backseat turret. The bullets started finding their mark easier. A headlight eye shattered, and the impacts on the hood weren't shedding sparks anymore, but puffs of rapidly aerosolized liquid. Oil, maybe, or blood, or both. Then, as it whipped back toward them, the raised mounds on the hood and sides puffed outward with some kind of steam, and the other car returned fire. The noise was a screeching metallic rattle, like the world's angriest rain, as impacts struck the side of their car. The rear-view mirror, far too close to James's head for comfort, jerked sideways with a crack as a long organic needle barely missed his face and jammed into it. He kept his hands on the wheel and begged the engine for just a little more speed in his head, trying not to think about the fact that the plastic strut holding the mirror in place was rotting at the impact point. Then it almost hit them. Except, mercifully, James's shield bracer worked. a glowing dome of light, painfully bright even against the double suns overhead, and the monster deflected, physics defied, for just a moment. It didn't seem that shaken by the strike, though, bouncing off and then whipping back toward them, pulling up without attempting to ram again. James barely had time for his brain to register that it was an insect, all the lines and shapes of it echoing the aesthetic of a bug. But now, as their pursuer pulled alongside them with a speed that still came far too easily despite all the bullets in it, it opened up its own doors. Which is to say, the passenger side doors irised out like hostile fanged apparatuses, revealing fully the inside of the car and the lifeless human skeleton in the driver's seat, seatbelts growing through its ribs like vines. Those same seatbelts were alive and thrashing in the other seats, pouring out toward them, pulled backward by the whipping wind, but still reaching for their car, reaching for purchase. Anesh fired into them, shutting down a few of the attempts, but there were hundreds of the things, all with tiny fanged grippers on the end, and one gun wasn't enough to kill it. So he changed tactics, reached out with his own asphalt manipulation, grabbed the road under his target and yanked it upward in a sharp spike, the sharpest thing he could manage. No finesse, no focus, just a desperate attack lobbed off. The car dodged. Dodged, somehow, jerking away at the last second, looping around the jutting spike of asphalt like it knew it was coming, which, honestly, it might have. James noticed out of the corner of his eye as he watched the asphalt get slapped back down into the road. James made the connection, mental enhancements on full burn, his perception pushed so far beyond human limits it was starting to become painful. "Anesh!" he bellowed over the continuing gunfire. His partner shifted slightly, hearing him. "Spike, left side, 3, 2, 1. And then, in place of saying 0, James used his own power to form a spike to the right side of the car, driving up toward its hood and right side tires, while Anesh, catching on quickly, just in time, did the same on the opposite. In unison, their magic declared one thing to their enemy. "Try to dodge both of us." It almost did. They weren't perfectly in sync, after all, and at speeds of over 100 miles an hour, that meant a split second was 50 feet of distance. But the other car was going just as fast, and while it slid smoothly past the first attempt, taking only a small scratch to its hull, or skin, the second one caught it inside the wheel well. The asphalt was rapidly jerked out of their control, but it had already done its job. The tire shredded. The chunk of rocky matter punched deep into the inside of the car, digging a furrow in the metal of its chassis before it got caught, and yanked the vehicle down at a strange point before the asphalt itself snapped. The enemy car, from an outside perspective, exploded shrapnel out from its side, pitched forward at high speed, and then, teetering, gave into physics and toppled onto its roof, rolling over and over, shedding shell and metal and shattered glass behind it across a mile-long stretch of road as it bled speed. James and Anesh howled defiantly relieved laughter as James brought their car down to a reasonable safe stop. Taking his shaking hands off the wheel, he slumped back in his seat, a long, drawn-out mix of a sigh and a scream escaping him. Then he opened his door and stumbled out on unsteady feet, sweat already dripping off his forehead from the heat of the suns, and flipped off the shattered corpse behind them on the burning road. The fight lasted less than a minute. It was 15 minutes later that Elle rejoined them. James and Anesh, after taking a minute to breathe, have some water, and pick the flood of shell casings out of the back seat of their Subaru, had headed back toward the crash site to assess their foe. James had parked the car about 50 feet away, just to give them a little distance in case it exploded or something, but it didn't look like it was going to. Anesh had approached the overturned vehicle, while James was examining their own car. The spines that had riddled the driver's side were bad news. Wherever they hit, it seemed like they penetrated, and where they were stuck in his car, they radiated sprawling organic lines of decay and corruption. It wasn't rust. No, his precious new road trip car was rotting. The metal and plastic and paint of its structure was turning to a slimy goo that dripped slightly in the sun. But parts of it were already self-repairing. The gas in their tank, a healing potion for cars, was already doing its work in the short time they'd taken to drive back here. James had initially been annoyed they'd found a health potion for a vehicle before a human. After all this time, it was kind of annoying, but he wasn't going to complain as he yanked the spines out and let the idling engine purge the corruption. He practically jumped out of his own shoes as gunfire rang out behind him, and James spun to see Anesh standing over the crashed car, having fired a burst directly into the engine. "Sorry," Anesh called back as James placed a hand over his heart and tried to pretend he hadn't stopped breathing for a second. "It twitched," Anesh said. "Yeah, so did I," James yelled back, heading over to join his boyfriend and popping the earplugs out. "Fuck, this thing is creepy up close, too." It really was, with bulging protrusions across parts of its chassis and half the metal stripped away where Anesh had separated the steel in its frame. It was hard to tell if the organic-looking spurs of metal were from an attack or part of its natural growth. The inside was dripping liquid, thickly humid under even the dry suns, and the oily blood from the crater Anesh had carved into its hood, along with all the other wounds, coated the road around it in a thin layer. "I want to call it a dune buggy," James said. "Any objections?" "I was thinking monster truck, but that might be too limiting," Anesh shrugged, slinging his gun back to his shoulder to kneel down and examine the buggy's tires up close. While he did that, James moved over to the driver's side and kicked away some of the shattered glass in the window. It seemed to be real glass, and not some sticky organic facsimile like he expected, which was strange, but at least less messy. Kneeling down, James peered into the crumpled interior at the skeleton that was still tied to the chair. Half of the bones had been pulverized in the crash, but the skull was still intact, along with a bit of the spine and legs. Scraps of fabric that weren't the entwined seatbelt stuck out, old decayed clothing, making James suspect this had once been a real person and not just a dungeon construct. He reached in, carefully trying to avoid slashing his arm open on any of the jagged pieces of metal or bone, and grabbed at what used to be a jacket pocket. The material was so close to falling apart that the front of it practically crumbled under his touch. James snagged what fell out with the tips of his fingers and pulled his arm out of the car. "Map fragments," he muttered. This was a Delver. "Hey, come check this out," Anesh called from the other side of the wreck. "Sup?" James asked, circling around as he pocketed the slips of indestructible map. Anesh held up a small ball of something black and smooth, wiping a dirty hand on his pants as he did so. "Take a look at this." "An orb," James grinned. "I know this one." "No." "Well, I tried." He poked at the bowling ball-sized lump and jerked back slightly as it rippled out from around the contact point of his finger. "What is this?" "What remains of one of the tires. It folded up into this when I cut it away. I'm going to harvest the others. Can you help?" James jogged back to their car with a wordless grin, and then jogged back, carrying the short sword that had been tucked under the driver's seat. "Yes!" he enthusiastically exclaimed. "I feel like you'll be really disappointed when that doesn't work the way you want it to work," Anesh told him, but he wasn't hiding his own grin. It was true. It didn't work the way James wanted it to. It also didn't work the way Anesh wanted it to, and no amount of hacking or sawing from either of them seemed capable of getting the other tires to detach from their wheels. The two of them were still working on the problem when the sound of an engine reached them, and they wordlessly abandoned their project to take cover behind the wreck. They didn't need to bother, though, because the car that approached from down the highway was a familiar bright red convertible, and as Elle pulled up next to their car and got out, shotgun in hand, looking scared but determined, James decided to stop peeking over the crumpled undercarriage and cut her a break. "Yo!" he called out. "Over here! We're not dead!" "Oh, fuck!" Elle exclaimed, jogging over with no regard for trigger discipline. "You guys okay? What happened? Fuck, I'm so sorry. I don't... What happened?" she repeated, eyes scanning the wreckage around them. "We won," James told her. "Also, seriously, don't worry about it. Normally, I'd be mad about you abandoning us to die." Elle winced. "But in this case, right call. The panic is something we should work on, but that was tactically correct. You didn't have any firepower to add. If you'd been in the area, we might have hit you, which would have been bad. Don't feel guilty, okay? Elle nodded, shoulders sagging in relief. I still feel like shit. And I did screw up. I wasted velocity running instead of keeping it so I could use engine if I needed to. So I was wrong, and so are you. Really can't get through one conversation without... Anesh cut James off. Hey, instead of all this, can you do me a favor? Hit the tire with one of the earring charges. Perfected strike? James cocked an eyebrow. Okay, good work. I don't have full charges on it though, so I'm only going to try once. James turned away from Elle, putting his annoyance on hold as he leveled his sword again. He took a few practice motions. He wasn't actually trained in using this particular weapon, it was just something he could focus the earring through, which he did now, mentally opening the menu of the status quo item and asking it politely for one use of perfected strike. His arms shifted, his blade moved, and James felt the calm purl of emotion that meant, I have done this exactly right, as he hit the rubber of the tire in the one spot, the one angle, with the perfect amount of force to slice neatly through it and carve it away from the rest of the wreck. It promptly curled up into a semi-liquid ball, which Anesh rolled over with a foot and swept up. Well, that looks stellar. Also, thanks. I'm going to go stash these, he said, heading back to their car and popping the back door to roll the rubber orb in. So, you ever kill one of these before? He asked Elle, trying to restart the conversation in a way that wasn't hostile. No way, she shook her head. Shit, I wouldn't even know how. You two are kind of scary, you know? James looked over at Anesh as his boyfriend waddled over to their car while trying to hold two oversized lumps of material. Oh yeah, terrifying. He felt the happy grin on his face. So, no insight into what we should look for? Like loot drops or anything? Nothing I remember, Elle shrugged, looking down at the front of the overturned car. Huh. Hang on. She knelt down, setting her shotgun over to the side as she grabbed under the frame of the vehicle and shimmied herself across the road so she could look into the hood. What's this? She asked James, from her position underneath the wreck, looking up at the thinly glowing projection that had caught her attention as she had looked at the dead dune bug. James dropped to his knees and bent down to look at what she was looking at. There, through a gap in the torn hood, was some kind of floating visual distortion. James couldn't exactly describe it quite right, but it was two things. One was very familiar for some reason. The other was a map. He knew it was a map. It was shaped like a map, in a way that was inescapable, even though it was also shaped like something else. A teardrop shape, maybe, or a seed. Weird, he said, rolling his arm shoulder onto the asphalt to slide in next to Elle. I'm going to touch it, he said. If I go insane, shoot me and tell Anesh I died doing something stupid. Sure, Anesh nodded without hesitation. Excuse me, Anesh said, standing directly next to the wreck. James had already touched it, and everything had been fine, but Anesh's words startled him, and his hand twitched, and the thing crushed within his grip. It didn't take a lot of effort. Just a little bit. That was what was familiar. Whoops, James said, as the map that had been hovering over the dead heart of the bug sunk into his flesh. James was somewhere else, but he hadn't moved, and he was suddenly painfully aware that he was not moving. Moving was important, damn it, and every second he wasn't moving was a second he wasn't following a route. He had a proper route now. He knew the landmarks to pass, the archetypes of adventure he would encounter, the prize at the end, a prize beyond any other, the prize of something that would make him happy. James would have frowned if he had a body here, in this elsewhere space. Happy? Make him happy? Change him, or give him exactly what he wanted? He'd heard this before. He pushed back. The map shifted. Okay, he didn't want happiness. What about something else? Wealth, power, fame? It could chart a route there. No, James didn't want those. Wealth was toxic to him, power was a responsibility he already had, and fame... Fame sounded exhausting, honestly. Where was he? He was in his own mind. He could feel it around him. This was familiar. His thoughts, along with all the modifications to his soul that the dungeon tech had made over the last few years, a little starfield of yellow, purple, and red orbs just out of sight. Glittering, unseen machinery of absorbed blues and one orange orb. Foundational bedrock libraries of his lessons, and winding trails that led to other souls, connections to Sarah and Inesh, gifted by the attic. The connections fascinated the map that was trying to find a route for him. It stopped offering him things he didn't want when James let his attention pass over them. What were they? Where did they go? Why could the map go anywhere but not there? James tried to explain. They were links to his friends, bonds. They weren't roads he'd traveled, but he'd already walked down those paths, and he walked them every day. Part routine, part adventure. The map didn't understand. That was okay, James told it. Maybe he could show the map, if it wanted. The map did want, in a way, but it wasn't bound here. It was already falling apart, without a route. It needed to show him somewhere to go. James understood. All right, he asked it. Take me somewhere that has really good burgers. I feel like I want a really good burger. The map offered contentment and relief and folded itself into James's mind. He opened his eyes. Ow, James said, realizing his head hurt. Are you okay? Inesh demanded of him. Don't move, you hit your head. James moved anyway, bringing a hand up to feel the lump on the back of his skull. His hand also ached, and he saw a bandage wrapped around it, red with blood. He must have sliced it open on something when he touched the seed. Ugh, he groaned. Yeah, I'm fine, except for all the physical stuff. Can you sit up? Inesh and Elle had dragged him over to lay in the thin shade next to his car, and he pushed himself up off the hot asphalt with his good hand. Water? James took the offered bottle from Inesh and drank greedy gulps. Oh, thanks. So? Elle asked. So what? So what was it? A trap? James took a breath of hot air. Ah, no, it's... Well, maybe. He opened and closed his fingers a few times. I might need some time to think about this, and it might be a trap. I think it's one of those tricks the dungeons pull. I think it folded a trap into a reward. What happened to you while you were passed out? Inesh asked quietly. And do we need to telepad back so Planner and Path can clear it? No, James waved him off, rolling to a kneeling position. We worked it out. It's a map. Fuck, I just realized something. He looked around, throwing his arms wide. This is where Pathfinder came from, James announced. Remember? She wasn't an office construct. She started as a map that a different dungeon broadcast in. This is her home. He looked at Inesh and met his boyfriend's eyes. And I just got something like that. Like her. You said it was a trap. Inesh looked suspicious. I think it's meant to be both, James said. It offered me happiness. It offered to take me to anything I wanted. I think it's meant to be a loot drop for some of the more dangerous delvers, so that when they leave, they stay gone. Because I can feel where it's guiding me, and it isn't in the dungeon, it's on Earth. Oh, that's clever, Inesh drawled out the last word. Oh, that's smart. Give people exactly what they want that will make them piss off. Exactly. You two gonna explain any of this? Elle asked, standing off to the side and leaning on her own hood. Yeah, sure, James said, pushing himself to his feet and offering Inesh a hand up too. Once we're back on the road, I vote we cut this one short if that's okay, and also because the cars have air conditioning. That's fine, though we're gonna pass a gas station on the way out. Want to stop for a poke-through? Elle asked. That sounds good to me, James agreed. We can explain over the radio as we go. The three of them climbed into their respective cars, and James clicked his seatbelt into place, readjusting the heeled rearview mirror as he prepared to pull around the crumbling wreckage of the dune bug. Hey, where's the map in your head leading anyway? Anesh asked from the back seat, rolling the windows back up so the AC could get back to work. You said it offered you happiness. Oh, I turned that down. That was suspicious. I made a deal with it. It's going to take me somewhere way more likely to make me actually happy than any kind of magical effect. Somewhere with good food. Anesh blinked and let out a single chuckle. Yeah, that made sense for James. And this restaurant is? It's a diner called Dax Daycare, which I have a feeling serves bacon burgers. Well, you'll be mine, Anesh told him. James laughed. Yeah, that's the nature of being friends with me. Anyway, ready to move? I'm all set. Let's get going. Glad you're okay. It was shocking, James mused quietly, just how easily he forgot where they were again and tried to slip back into road trip mode. Yes, there were all these obvious contrasts, and the cut on his hand and the second sun overhead, and Anesh checking and rechecking his gun in the back seat were all obvious, comically blatant reminders that he wasn't on the I-5 or something. But he'd been driving for an hour now, with basically nothing to focus on, and his brain was rebelling against the boredom. They'd filled L in. They'd already figured out where they were going and how far they had to travel. He and Anesh even had lunch, going through the last of the Tupperware containers of beef stew they had stored in the bottom of the lunchbox of specifically holding lunch and only lunch. So he was left without much to do as he kept the car going straight and his eyes peeled for any more incoming murderous vehicles. You there? He thought to the map embedded in his subconscious, but there was no response. James spent a little while trying to come up with what they'd call this style of infomorph, but eventually gave up when the light and heat and bruise on his head combined into a truly distracting headache. Maybe they just asked Pathfinder what she wanted to name her people. 10 minutes of driving later, he tried a different tactic. I'm bored, he announced to Anesh. Well, you can't be that, you're the driver, Anesh replied. Also, checking in again, still feeling okay? Yeah, I can feel the map as separate from my own thoughts. It's not trying to be stealthy or intrusive. It's just there if I ask. James sighed. Honestly, I'm really thinking this is the dungeon being all tricky, and it's a little more clever than you said, even. How so? Okay, well, so someone comes in here, right? What's the easiest monster? It's a lump of metal and stone that wants to eat your feet, and then the rest of you. So they start poking around. What happens? Well, they probably get eaten, Anesh offered, shifting his position to double-check the empty stretch of desert on the other side of the car. James grinned, unseen, as Anesh fell for his trap. Ah, but see, they have a car, yes? So they at least survive a little while. And that's not really a huge problem for this place, which seems to use size and distance as defense. But what if someone gets in, pokes around a bit, and then comes back better prepared, like, say, every Delver ever? Then Anesh trailed off. I'm not sure I see where you're going with this, he admitted. People come in. They probably survive if they don't go too far or stay too long, and then they leave and come back later. And eventually they're going to score a kill, or at least a good chunk of them will. James thought back to the feeling of the map mark in his hand, the feeling of the object itself, before he'd reflexively cracked it like he would an orb and let the infomorph into his head. They're going to find a map and probably use it, maybe find more than one, and take some out. And what then? Don't use the Socratic method on me, Anesh jokingly admonished. Then they leave, James said firmly. Because why the fuck would you come back into the Hell Road when you could go on a normal vacation on Earth and end up making your way to buried pirate gold or something? Most people don't know how dungeons function. They're going to think they got what the place has to offer and they're going to go for it. And it's a trap. And a reward, all at once. Everyone wins. The Delvers get rich or happy or something, and the dungeon gets everyone to leave, and it gets to be left alone. I have a question, Anesh asked quietly, putting his thoughts together with James's words. He took a second, letting the machinery of his brain connect the pieces and line up the thought. What are the odds that the reason so many people are leaving this city... Ah, James hummed. Ah, well, that would be... Wait, that's, what, 8 to 10,000 people? How many people do you think have found this place? Or have been made to find this place, Anesh pointed out. How many abandoned cars are there in the city? No, that doesn't check out. Why would there be abandoned cars if people were delving the dungeon that needs a car? I do not have a good answer for that. I'm sure when I learn the answer to that, I will hate it, so thanks for preparing me. Anesh shook his head. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's people teaming up, and the ones that die, because that was a human skeleton, wasn't it? They come in with a few people in one car and leave the other cars outside in reality. Maybe? Could be that. If there is some kind of thing drawing people in, then not everyone comes in a car, which would be bad. James winced. I think the word you're searching for is murder, perhaps, Anesh filled in. Yeah, thanks. Car. Anesh's voice turned sharp, and James tensed up, hands gripping the wheel hard once again. The casual conversation shattered in an instant and replaced by the anxiety of imminent combat and potential death. Again. And then, just as James was getting ready to bring their speed back up to irresponsible levels, Anesh added, Parallel to us. How far to the garage? James clicked the radio. Hey, El, we got another car to our side. How far do you reckon? Are we fighting again? Over. He'd barely gotten the last word out when she was replying. Just up ahead. I don't think it's seen us, so we'll park and let it pass, yeah? Yep. Over. James stressed the last word, shaking his head and ignoring Anesh's quiet laugh in the back seat. All right, a few more miles. Keep an eye on it. Anesh snorted. Well, yes, he said, rolling the window down and keeping his gun up, ruining all the air conditioning's hard work again. It was a stressful few minutes, not knowing if they were going to have to engage in vehicle-to-vehicle combat again, but in the end it worked out okay. The gas station, with its boxy little convenience store brick structure, appeared over the horizon and closed distance to them rapidly as the two cars cut a straight line at high speed through the desert. When they pulled off, with James's nerves at an all-time high, they had to slow to about 30, and then even lower to cut through the thin strip of safe driveway that wasn't made out of metal caltrops. He felt like they were just begging to be ambushed. In the office, life was silence and careful observation. You moved quietly, you kept your eyes open, and if anything went wrong, there were 15 ways to break line of sight within a few steps of you. Small bursts of motion, ambushes, and above all, patience would win you your battles there. Here, though, out on the route, there was almost nowhere to hide. Nowhere to run, even, not really. The road was perfect for high speeds, but you couldn't shake anything that was after you. Not exactly. So James had caught on quickly. Your defense was speed. The ability to control the engagement envelope, to let the boyfriend in the back seat lay down fire on anything that came after you until it gave up or died. And yeah, sure, inside the buildings, where the interiors of normal-looking structures had been turned into labyrinthian clusters of material that didn't make sense and were often full of hostile non-car entities, then you had similar rules to Officium Mundi. But here, now, behind the wheel, slowing down felt wrong. It didn't get him killed this time, though. But that didn't change the fact that his foot was itching for the gas pedal as he pulled past the single spire of a lamp post in the middle of the parking lot and brought the car to a stop. The three of them hid in the shadow of gas pumps and their sheet metal awning until the car tailing them out in the sand passed by. While they waited, James idly asked Elle if mixing different magic gasoline flavors gave cars superpowers, and Elle admitted she didn't actually know. Anesh decided they weren't going to find out today, because the other option aside from superpowers was that their cars exploded. They slipped into the brick building through the back door, the employee entrance next to an unnaturally clean dumpster being the only way in that actually worked. James had tried the front door, but it wasn't real. The glass and metal push bar and everything was there, yes, but it was all one fused lump. It didn't move at all. Inside was just as weird as the first time. Shelves stacked and turned like Tetris blocks all the way to the ceiling, forming thin paths forward and sharp-lined shadows from the light still flooding in from outside. They crawled and climbed their way through, James finding himself blinking away sudden changes in light multiple times as they'd go from near darkness to back in a beam of light from the sun's coming through the window. Just like the first time, the inside was devoid of anything living. At least, anything living that decided to take a shot at three confident-looking and well-armed people using their shelf homes as maneuvering points. Also just like the first time, when they found themselves dropping down behind the front counter from an overhanging tan metal shelf, James rolled his eyes as the front door was obviously sitting propped open and ready to walk out. A one-directional shortcut. Travel brochure here. Ooh, a lighter. Are these magic? He asked Elle, shaking the small black plastic tube next to his head and listening to the liquid slosh around inside. I never found one, so maybe, Elle asked. Point it away from me, you shit, she yelped as James clicked the lighter a couple of times and sparked a flame. I know, he waved her off as he examined the normal-looking fire. This is, believe it or not the first time I've handled something that could potentially incinerate somebody. Though I suppose the last serious time it was Alana almost setting me on fire. James gave a small smile and glanced over at Anesh. Now we have protocols for that sort of thing. Anesh shook his head. Oh, that was so long ago. We should bring Alana here when we find her again. I think she'd like it more than me. Ah, not having fun? James ribbed, searching through the empty drawers under the cash register, while Anesh kept an eye out. Ah, it's just too hot. This is about 1.5 more suns than you see on average where I'm from. And then I spent 5 years in your state, where it's not really much better except in the summer. Anesh wiped the back of a hand on his neck. I am sweating so much, and it's awful. Behind them, Elle chirped up. Oh hey, smokes, she said, standing up with a half-full pack of cigarettes, white and red packaging proudly labeling them as Dire Stars. There is no fucking way those are safe, James said. Hey, what? No, it's like the food in your dungeon. These are always fine. They just have weird names and flavors. Elle pulled one out. Give me the lighter. James passed it over. I meant because they're going to give you cancer, he told her. Also, please don't light that in here. I hate the smell of those, and I refuse to put up with that shit from you right now. She flipped him off, but pocketed the lighter anyway instead of sparking it up, leaving the cigarette dangling between her teeth. So anything else here? We headed out already. Kind of a small one today, huh? I mean, we got a few map chunks. We can do a once-over when we get out. Tomorrow, Anesh and I will spend some time starting to dig into what's going on here. See if we can verify the map thing, you know? James said, pulling himself up and sliding his ass over the counter with an easy little hop. Elle shouldered past him in what she probably thought was a playful motion, turning to face him and Anesh as she walked backward out the door. I'm thinking of just leaving, she said. Like, Taunton in general. I only came back with my mom, you know? Elle said as she ducked out into the hot sun. And my car, but mostly Mom. And now I'm here and she's just... bleh. I getcha. But we should still figure out where 3/4 of your town's population went, right? James wanted to either say the words with a laugh or a lecture. He couldn't really tell which, so he split the difference and went for dry amusement instead. Just seems a smidge important. James paused suddenly, quirking his head to the side. He'd felt something. Something different. Something had changed. He turned to look at Anesh, and as he did so, Elle lurched forward, very abruptly, grabbing onto Anesh's shoulder and lashing out a leg at James, connecting with his stomach and sending him sprawling backward onto the pavement. James had a moment of shock, that never really got the chance to manifest into a feeling of betrayal, because as soon as he hit the pavement, wind knocked out of him like he'd put up a no vacancy sign on his lungs, he saw the vulture. It had perched atop the lamp post in plain sight. The thing must have flown in while they were inside. 3 heads, all of them grim, boxy security cameras, all of them triangulating down on him. Already diving toward him, talons out. It opened its mouth and sounded like a tornado siren starting to wail from a mile away, slowly building. Elle yanked Inesh's gun up and sprayed the thing with bullets. The bullpup's 5.7 ammo, capable of punching holes in a car, was more than able to tear holes in the vulture. Black feathers and shards of plastic and bone sprayed into the air, along with splatters of blood that darkened the scorched pavement with a hiss of steam as it came down like rain. A second later, Elle stopped firing as the vulture's corpse slammed into the ground next to James's head. "Fuck me, this thing is loud," she yelled, working her jaw and rubbing at her ear as she handed the gun back to Inesh, who stepped back from the girl who'd taken his weapon away and eyed her suspiciously, even as he acknowledged the dead monster on the pavement. James groaned as he pulled himself up. "Ow," he said. "Ow, my lunch. Oh, that feels awful. Why?" he moaned, clutching his stomach. "Sorry, dude. That was what it gave me. I didn't have much leeway to get you out of the way. Sorry." Elle was still talking too loudly, gunfire having deafened her a bit. "You okay?" "Please explain," Inesh asked her in a too polite voice, hands keeping a steady grip on his gun even if it wasn't in a firing position. "She's a time wizard," Inesh told his partner. "I'm a... Damn it." Elle looked dejected as she was beaten to the punch. I have a spell that lets me tweak stuff in the past, so there's always a way forward for me. It's not super flexible, but it works, you know?" "What did you tweak this time?" James asked. "Kicking me?" "No, Elle shook her head, spraying drops of blood from her nose that she didn't seem to have noticed. "I had to change a couple of things. I don't think the spell liked one of them." "Kicking me was one of them," James stated. "Yeah, sorta. I think the other one was getting Inesh to forget to turn his safety back on," Elle said. "It's the kick that messed me up. It turns out exploiting my personal ass-saving ability to keep other people from getting killed isn't that easy, especially if I wasn't going to die first. And I am now way more okay with us leaving today." James blinked. "Oh," he said. "I died a second ago?" "Well, no, I died a second ago. You almost died, and a little bit sooner," Elle said, spitting out the cigarette she had ground into a mushy lump with her teeth while she was shooting. "Anyway, you okay? I kicked you kinda hard there." "I'm good," James said. "Let's get out of here." Inesh slid past him, laying a hand on James's shoulder. "One second," he said. "I want the map from this one, too, if it has one. It could be important, and if not, it's good to know if they drop them." He knelt next to the vulture corpse and turned it over, and there, glowing light that wasn't quite visible, was a map marker. He picked up the seed, carefully not activating it as he slid it into one of the pouches on his armor. "All right, now let's go." Back in their cars, back on the road, back toward the breach and the archway and the real world again. As they slid back into reality, Inesh and James took some time to put their seats back, stow the various little pieces of loot they'd collected, and strip their armor off to feel cool air on their skin like a priceless balm. They spoke quietly to each other. Elle had already headed home, and the two of them were parked off to the side of the road by the dungeon entrance, stretching their legs outside of the car for a bit before they went back to the cramped room of their motel. "She saved my life," James said. "Looks that way." "Well, damn." He shook his head. "I feel weird now." "Why, because you were prepared to write her off?" "I guess, but maybe not. Or, okay, no. Yeah, I was prepared to just sit back and think of Elle as an asshole and myself as the good guy, but it's not that simple, is it? She's not actually a bad person, she's just kind of a dick sometimes." Anesh let out a single huff of breath. Oh. A little too familiar, perhaps? I'm not sure who you mean, James said, coy. But that could be half the people we know. Just invite her to join the Order and be done with it. She... James stopped himself. You were going to say she wouldn't fit in? Anesh asked. None of us do, though, do we? Does anyone fit into the Order? We all do, with each other, yes, his partner answered. That's sort of the point. We made a group that's inclusive of anyone who's willing to step up and solve problems in a way that helps people. That includes assholes. We work with JP, for Christ's sake. James started laughing and found that it made him feel a little bit better, letting the stress of the delve wash off him as he just calmed down and reacted to Anesh's half-joke. First of all, I like JP. I mean, I tolerate JP, he admitted. He is my friend, though. I guess if we can take him, we can take L, huh? He said, mostly to himself. Alright, let's... He broke off as the bushes to the side of the road rustled behind them. Anesh jumped, but James turned with a grin on his face. He'd spent so long living in the suburbs that this place, with all the forested area butting up against the so-called civilized spaces, felt nice. The number of raccoons and deer that he'd seen on this trip hadn't yet been enough to make him bored of it yet. Which is why it was a bit of an uncomfortable surprise when, off the gravel shoulder of the road, a small asphalt lump in the ground shuffled forward like a thick slug, merging with the freeway like it belonged there, and slithering off down the road toward the city. Was that? Yeah. Fuck. Well, good news, Anesh told him, worriedly checking around his feet for more of the creatures before quickly hopping back into their car. You were right. There is a reason this place has the dungeon feel to it. James got in and slammed the car door. I'll be honest, he said. I really wouldn't have minded if I'd been wrong.